Okay. That's good. Okay. Episode number 17, Good Guys, Bad Guys. We got the Cold War going on here between the Soviet Union and its client states, and the United States and our allies. But you know what? The Soviet Union is also going to have some countries that don't have Soviet troops occupying them, unlike in Eastern Europe, and they're actually going to join up with the Soviet side to one degree or the other. And the United States and the free world is also going to be having some countries and groups and so forth that will be aligning with us. What we're going to be looking at is Africa and Asia, okay? Looking at those different regions as far as particularly the Middle East part of Asia, and where they come in on the side of the Cold War. Write this down. At the end of World War II, we already know this, the French colonial empire will end up becoming pretty much all independent countries. Sometimes there's going to be a fight here and there. We saw with Algeria. We saw with Southeast Asia. The English colonial empire, particularly in Africa and, of course, in India, also, these are going to become all independent countries. I mean, you look over at my wall over here with all those flags. If we were to do just the flags of the countries in existence by 1945, it would be about a third the size of that. I mean, I'm serious. We've added on, in the last 70 years or so, a lot of new countries. So how does that impact in the Cold War? Write this down. The Soviets want to pick up allies. They want to win over different countries in the world to be on their side. And sometimes they'll have advantages, like, for example, we saw in the conflict in Vietnam. France wanted to maintain its empire, and the Soviets are like, good luck with that. We're going to help Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese forces that were trying to become independent. And they made they took an opportunity there. So they'll be looking to expand. And the United States, playing a key role in the West, are going to be trying to hold off the Soviets' expanse. Because think of this. If you can get a really close, or a new ally really close to your opponent, does that give you some advantages? So, for example, Ellie, what country became a really close ally to the Soviets? We've already covered this. Not that far from the United States. Exactly, yeah, Cuba is a very good example. And some of these ones, it's kind of like, well, why are we interested in fighting over whether or not some part in Africa is going to be a friend or not? Sometimes it's like, why? Can anyone raise your hand? Tell me, why would an African country, why would that be important that they would be on one side or the other? Why would we try so hard to get them on our side? Can you think? Trade? Sometimes a particular type of trade. Didn't we already talk about Zaire, the Congo? What was so important that the United States wanted to make sure that we were friends with whatever government ended up being in charge, sort of, in the Congo? They have mineral resources. It wasn't so much gold. They were critical mineral resources that were not available in some other parts of the world that were very important for us to create metal alloys for our military equipment and machines and aircraft and so forth. Okay? One area in particular is always a lot of attention is paid to it. Write this down. The Middle East. The Middle East. The Middle East is important for oil. Okay? Right here. The Middle East is very important for oil, but it's also, look at where it's located. It's the confluence of Europe, Asia, and Africa. You've got the Suez Canal going through it. You've got a lot, it's very close to the Soviet Union. It's very close to Europe. It's a very important area. And it is, by its nature and the way things have kind of shaken out, very, very intense and very hotly contested. Okay? What is one of the big issues that's going on there, Jacob, as far as I don't know, there's so many wars that take place in the Middle East, beginning right after World War II. I'll give you a clue. It has something to do not only with national identity, but with religious identity. Which is one of the countries? I'll look over at Middle Eastern countries. In fact, if you look visually, kind of right in here, you've got a lot of the Middle Eastern countries right in here, and you can see a lot of similarities, like red and green and white and black. You see that so often in the color. What is one country that kind of stands out as like, we're different? Israel. Is Israel going to be in a lot of conflicts with its neighbors? Yes. Are the neighbors initially like, yay, wow, we're so happy to have you as a new country, Israel. We see that you used to be part of the British Empire, but now you're an independent, neutral country. Ha ha. No. The blue, I don't think any of, you have to go pretty far over to Kazakhstan or so forth before you start seeing blue popping up, and blue is the main color there for the Israeli flag. So, write that down. Israel versus Arab countries. Is that an opportunity for the Soviet Union to make friends in what previously had been British and French-controlled areas in the Middle East? They're going to try. They're going to try very big because they will look, the Soviet Union will look and go, I think we can make friends with Arab countries, with countries that are predominantly Muslim, because who is the number one ally, friend, military supplier of Israel? Do you really not know the answer? Who is? The United States of America. Exactly, the United States of America. Now, here's actually kind of a trick question. Are any of you aware, during the number of fights, and we're going to get into several here, during the number of fights that have taken place between Israel and its neighbors after Israel became a country after World War II, has the United States ever sent in military forces to help Israel? No. You can write that down. No. No, the United States has not sent in military forces. We did in Vietnam, obviously, okay? But not in Israel, okay? One of the reasons we haven't is because, I suppose, we haven't had to. It's an amazing thing, if you look historically, that Israel has been the winner of just about all of these fights that they've been involved in, which is very frustrating to the countries around it because what... Yeah, I mean, it's not fair when you're like, okay. I mean, let's see if I can give you a number here. Oh, 2.5 million Jews living in Israel, and there's others, but the Jewish faith is the main faith in Israel proper. And you got like 90 million Arabs in the surrounding countries. Okay? Yeah. Oh, wow is right. Okay? Some of you guys recall in 1956, this leader right here, you might remember this, Nasser. He was a former general. He was like really well regarded by many of the people in Egypt and also other Arab countries. Nasser, write that down. Nasser was the one who in 1956 said, hey, that Suez Canal that's going through Egypt, that's like really important for Egypt, we're going to take that. Britain, France, Britain, we know you've had the canal and you've been operating it and so forth, we're going to take it. And did the British and the French take it? Yeah, they did. And Israel helped him in 1956. Who was it? Tara, who stepped in and said, Britain, no, you have to give the canal to the Egyptians. It's theirs. What country stepped in as like the bigger partner of an overall worldwide alliance with Britain and France? It was the United States. Yeah, that was kind of embarrassing. It's kind of like someday maybe when you have to tell your parents that they have to do something. Since you are in a stronger economic, financial, maybe just intellectual position. Are you guys ready to look after your parents at this stage in your life? Are they ready to be looked after and have decisions made for them? You're like, no, let me just get through high school, okay? But that's kind of the way it was. The United States was the leader, and our big question was, our big issue to the British and the French is, don't make it harder for us, the United States, and you guys, the Allies, to win the Cold War, to do well in the Cold War. We need these newly independent countries to be on our side. If we start acting all imperial against them, they're going to join up with the Soviets, and that's not going to work for us. Because if you look at the world, there's a lot of new countries in Africa and Asia and so forth, and we don't want to appear like the bully. You got that? So that was 1956. Egypt, Nasser was the hero. They got the Suez Canal. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 that. I mean, the British were operating the canal. They're like, that's ours. You know, we built it in the 1860s. That's our canal. You know, come on. Just because we built it and had the position to do that because we're an imperial power, you're not anymore. So, you ready? This is now, the issue is the Oswan Dam. I think I covered that with you guys before. Gamal Abdul Nasser, this was in the 1950s. He's like, I want to build the Oswan Dam. And ultimately, who did he make a deal with and improve the relationship with in the 1950s to build the dam on the Nile River to help with their flood control and energy power production? Was it the United States or the Soviets? Who did he make the deal with? Soviets, write it down. So the Soviets are going to be a very, very close friend of Egypt. And what's that? It's going to be a very interesting relationship. Here is a goal of the United States, and it will ultimately be achieved during the presidency of Richard M. Nixon. And that is, you ready? To peel Egypt and any other Middle Eastern Arab country away from close friendship with the Soviets and into a closer friendship with the United States. And that's going to be tricky. It might be easy if the United States was like, hey, what the heck, Israel, go your own way, we're not going to be friends with you anymore. Could the United States pull this off, being friends with Israel and with Arab countries like Egypt or Jordan or Lebanon or, I don't know, even Syria or who knows? That's going to be the goal. It's going to be tricky. It's not going to get there right away, all right? So as we go through this, we're going to look at these various different things. The film talks about like Ethiopia and Angola. We'll look at those ones later, but we're going to focus our attention first on the situation with Egypt. Nasser is looking for a way to hit Israel, okay? And he attacks. Write it down. 1967, Nasser attacks. Egypt attacks Israel. The 67 Six-Day War. Egypt on the offense, okay? Jordan also on the offense, and Syria also on the offense. You're going to see those three countries playing a key role. Syria up here in the north, Jordan over directly to the east, and then, of course, Egypt to the west. Six-Day War. Wow, that was a fast war. I wonder what the result of the Six-Day War was. Israel wants to destroy, Nasser and his allies want to destroy Israel. Just squish it. Soviet Union's not really that excited about it, but they're like, hey, whatever. We've sold you a bunch of weapons, and that works out really well for us. But, how did it work out for the Arab countries? Answer, very badly. Very badly. Take a look here. As a result of the 67 war, Egypt lose badly, and they lose the Gaza Strait and the Sinai Peninsula. Jordan loses the West Bank of the Jordan River, including, critically, whatever it had in Jerusalem. So the eastern part of Jerusalem that had been part of Jordan, Israel now occupies it. By the way, they still do. Syria lost the Golan Heights, a border region that, as its name says, is a higher region that kind of looks down onto both countries. The Israelis are like, yeah, we're going to take that, and they still have it today. Anybody have an idea why, for example, the Sinai Peninsula is no longer part of Israel? Because Egypt's got it back again. What had to happen for Egypt to get that land back? Yeah, we're going to see that in the next thing. We're going to see some treaties. We're going to see Egypt and Israel make peace. Jordan and Israel are going to make peace. Syria and Israel haven't quite got to that point yet. Although it's been interesting, over the last several months, other Arab countries, particularly in the Persian Gulf, have recognized or improved their relations with Israel, which is a big thing. And that was something that President Trump was pulling out and pointing out and saying, hey, look, we helped to have Israel have better relations and so forth with Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries. And part of that is going to be because we haven't gotten to it yet, but we're going to get to this as we get into the next unit. But who is a greater concern if you're, say, I don't know, Qatar or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia? Is it Israel or somebody else? It's Iran, okay? They're Muslim, but they're like Persian. They're Farsi. It's different. They're not Arab so much. And so there's a great deal of tension going on there. Yes? What? Good question. Why did Israel win? Well, they knew that there could be war coming again. Were they ready for it? They were. And here's actually, I've got it right here in my notes. Answer to your question, Sage. Who was providing Israel with weapons? Who was providing Egypt with weapons? Whose weapons work better? Yeah. I mean, it's not just the weapons work better, but the Egyptians were actually pretty upset with the quality of the weapons that they had received or purchased from or received from the Soviet Union. And sometimes it's not actually fair, because was the United States providing, selling, and sometimes just giving the best top quality weapons to Israel? Pretty much. Okay? That's always an interesting thing when you have an alliance with somebody. You know it's a really, really good alliance if you get the latest stuff. Okay? Otherwise, you might get like second generation or later stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, keep an eye on that one. So, when they lost the war, Egypt is preparing to go to war again. Nasser died in 1970. You write that down. Nasser died in 1970. The new leader of Egypt is going to be Anwar Sadat. And Anwar Sadat is very interesting because he wants to beat Israel. He's like, I'm going to beat Israel. And he's putting pressure on the Soviets to give him better weapons and sufficient weapons to go to war. And when the Soviet Union is hesitant to do that, he walks away. It's almost like a car negotiation, a car deal negotiation. He walks away. He's like, he kicks out the advisors. Write this down, 1972. Anwar Sadat kicked out the Soviet advisors. It's like, hey, if you're not going to be helping us out, then you're gone. 70. Yeah, 1970. So Sadat, it's almost like, is he serious about that? Is he going to be like joining up with the United States at that point? No. Eventually the Soviets were like, okay, we'll send you more weapons. We'll send you better weapons. And that's what Sadat wanted. He wanted the weapons. So like, okay, you can bring in your advisors and so forth. We're buddies again. We'll see how this plays out. What is he aiming for? He's aiming for a surprise attack. It's 1973. It's called the Yom Kippur War. The reason they call it the Yom Kippur War is because Yom Kippur is a Jewish holiday. And the idea behind the attack by Egypt and Syria is if they hit the Israelis while they're celebrating the holiday, they'll have an advantage. Guess what? It didn't work. Egypt attacked and ultimately lost. Syria attacked and ultimately lost. President Nixon was like, hey, should I give my best weapons to Israel in order to carry out this fight? And he was like thinking about like Kennedy. Remember when Kennedy was like helping Cuban exiles attack in Cuba? And Kennedy, did he like give full-on support for the Cuban exiles in the Bay of Pigs attack? No. And that was a failure. And of course Kennedy was concerned, well, it looks like we're going to have our fingerprints all over it. Nixon was like, well, it looks like we're going to have our fingerprints all over it, so we're just going to give them the best thing that we can have. Here you go, Israel. Good luck. Win your war, and Israel did. And afterwards, Nixon said, hey, Egypt, you know what? You want to be friends with us? And they started working toward more and more and more a closer relationship with Israel and Egypt that is going to bear fruit ultimately during the time of the presidency of Jimmy Carter, when Israel and Egypt will reach a peace agreement. They will recognize each other, and all will be well between those two countries. The Sinai Peninsula will go back to Egypt. Okay? We got a little bit more details on that later, and I'll continue talking about Africa after we do that one. Then I'll assign out the film for episode number 17. Okay? That sound good? All right, very good.